Right, so the June 24th ceasefire between Israel and Iran was heralded by Western governments and mainstream media outlets as a crucial breakthrough. A welcome pause after nearly 2 weeks of heavy bombardments, missile barrages, and cyber attacks, and came as something of a surprise given the US had literally only just struck 3 Iranian nuclear research facilities. But the truce was framed as a diplomatic success, evidence that both sides had been persuaded to step back from the brink of a catastrophic regional war. Even though Iran were not involved with that, they simply agreed to it because Israel was getting its backside handed to it. Yet for many in Tehran and other observers of the Israel-Iran conflict, this narrative was never convincing. In the weeks following the ceasefire, not only has Benjamin Netanyahu been to Washington, where he, amongst other things, floated the idea of attacking Iran again, mysterious explosions have been erupting across Iran, striking oil refineries and factories and residential complexes in the days and weeks since. Iranian officials have admitted privately that they have suspected Israeli sabotage. If so, then the ceasefire is again in customary Israeli fashion being breached here and, while not conclusively proven to be Israeli operations at this time, who else is it likely to be? Right, so mysterious blasts striking civilian infrastructure across Iran. Who could be behind that then? Is it likely to be a covert continuation of Israel's war against Iran? They are the obvious questions that will be jumping to people's minds now, aren't they? But this time going down a more clandestine route. Certainly understandable given the fright Iran gave Israel when they were much more publicly firing on each other last month. They reflect a strategy rooted in plausible deniability this time and designed to maintain military pressure on Tehran without inviting the devastating missile retaliation Israel suffered during that 12-day conflict. Have hostilities merely shifted from the skies to the shadows now, meaning the war never truly stopped? But the truce was always destined to be fragile, wasn't it? Look at Israel's ceasefire record on Gaza or Lebanon to know that an Israeli ceasefire all too often means you cease and they keep firing. Israel's June campaign aimed to deliver a decisive blow to Iran's nuclear ambitions by targeting key sites at Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan. Yet according to international nuclear monitors, and as I covered the other day, the strikes achieved far less than Netanyahu promised. Fordo did sustain significant damage, but Natanz and Isfahan emerged largely intact, with Iranian engineers already repairing centrifuges, potentially everything back up and running within weeks, therefore. Iran's response was equally significant, though. Its missile and drone retaliation was the largest it had ever launched directly at Israeli territory, overwhelming their air defences, damaging multiple air bases and striking deep into urban areas where Israel likes to build its military headquarters, civilian infrastructure, and therefore civilians essentially becoming human shields for Israel's military complex. Leaks reported by Haaretz described Israeli military officials as rattled, acknowledging privately that the scale of the strikes was unprecedented and forced urgent requests for additional US Patriot and THAAD batteries. Netanyahu, under heavy pressure from Washington, reluctantly accepted the ceasefire on June 24th. He's never been so quick to agree to a ceasefire before, has he? And you want to start up again now, so you wonder whether this was contingent upon those US bunker buster strikes that came just before it. This would explain why the ceasefire, though signed, was never a genuine political agreement. Both sides viewing it more as a tactical pause, a chance to regroup and rearm, and certainly both sides are acting along those lines. Iran is using the time to repair its nuclear infrastructure and its own defences, while Israel can repair its defences and replace its arsenal if it can get the goods in. Those Greek dock workers are making life hard for them. And perhaps consider alternative options to strike Iran. The thought of them not doing so not worth considering, since we know Netanyahu wants to go again. He said as much to Donald Trump. We know this. So the logic for Israel to turn to sabotage is actually quite compelling. After the June war, Israel faced two stark realities. First, its failure to cripple Iran's nuclear program meant that enrichment would resume swiftly, and certainly Iran have said as much, threatening the strategic balance Netanyahu sought to preserve. Second, another round of open conflict carries unacceptable risks. Israel were nowhere near as invulnerable as they thought they were. The June missile barrages have shaken public confidence, damaged Israel's deterrent image, and exposed weaknesses in their air defense network. Netanyahu cannot afford to appear weak anymore, not when his coalition government teeters on collapse as it is. But neither can he risk provoking Iran into a similar retaliatory response so soon without shoring up his offences and his defences. Sabotage, therefore, offers a solution to both problems. It allows Israel to delay Iran's nuclear and industrial recovery without openly violating the ceasefire. Mossad has long excelled at such operations, from the Stuxnet cyber attack on the Natanz to the assassination of nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Israel has repeatedly targeted Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure through covert means while avoiding direct attribution. The current spate of mysterious explosions bears all the hallmarks of this strategy. Oil refineries, petrochemical plants, and military-linked industrial facilities have been hit, precisely the kind of targets Mossad had prioritised in the past. And despite the Iranian crackdown on Mossad cells in Iran since the conflict, the ceasefire began, shall we put it, last month began, there's no guarantees they got them all. The Times of Israel's reporting yesterday, based on New York Times sources, made clear that Iranian officials privately suspected Israeli involvement. The Cradle's coverage went further, suggesting that Iranian investigators had already found evidence consistent with previous Mossad operations. Officially, Tehran has maintained that many of these incidents were caused by aging infrastructure or substandard equipment, yet even state media has begun hinting at foreign involvement, and the sheer number of incidents occurring in strategically vital locations undermines the credibility of that technical failure narrative. If Israel's strategy is designed to pressure Iran into halting its nuclear program, it appears to be having the opposite effect, though. Iranian leaders have responded not with concessions, but with open defiance. President Masoud Pezeshkian, speaking to Al Jazeera yesterday as well, declared that Iran would not suspend its nuclear enrichment, regardless of Israeli pressure or the threat of renewed strikes. Pezeshkian's statement was more than rhetorical bravado. It reflected a broader Iranian strategy of demonstrating resilience to domestic and international audiences. They won't back down from this. These comments come at a time that reinforces Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's position in speeches reported by Reuters on July the 16th, about a week ago now. He warned that Iran was prepared to deliver bigger blows if Israel resumed its attacks, framing Iran's missile arsenal as a credible deterrent. IRGC commanders echoed this, with Major General Mohammad Pakpour and Chief of Staff Mohammad Bagheri describing Iran's forces as being at peak operational readiness. This readiness has been evident in Iran's actions. Missile brigades have reportedly been repositioned to enable strikes deep inside Israel, while Financial Times satellite analysis confirmed the redeployment of Bavar 373 and Khordad 15 air defense systems around nuclear and military sites. Iran's naval forces, too, have been assertive. Another example of this combat readiness has been the news that an Iranian IRGC helicopter confronted the USS Fitzgerald in the Gulf of Oman, forcing the US destroyer to alter its course. The incident served as a pointed reminder that Iran is not demobilizing and remains prepared to defend its interests against both Israeli and US threats. IRGC officials have been blunt in their interpretation of the situation. As Press TV reported, commanders now describe the current truce as merely a suspension of hostilities. And this assessment is hard to dispute when Iran is simultaneously repairing nuclear infrastructure, rearming, and warning public of retaliatory strikes, all whilst mysterious blasts are going off around the country. If Israel is indeed behind these explosions, then it's already violated the ceasefire in every meaningful sense, though. The US brokered agreement of June the 24th required a cessation of all offensive military actions by both parties. International law does not differentiate between overt airstrikes and covert sabotage. Acts of sabotage that destroy infrastructure or risk civilian casualties are acts of war. Israel's defense lies in plausible deniability at this point, not legality. As long as Iran cannot produce irrefutable proof, Israel can claim adherence to the ceasefire whilst potentially continuing this alleged campaign of theirs in secret. But this strategy leaves Iran in a difficult position. Retaliating without public evidence would allow Israel and its Western allies to paint Tehran as the aggressor, undermining Iran's diplomatic position. But Iran's leaders clearly view the truce as already broken in spirit. Every single public statement from Pezeshkian, from Khamenei, from other politicians, from IRGC commanders suggests that Tehran considers itself still at war, merely waiting for the inevitable moment where they have to respond again. So the central question now is how long this illusion can last. Iran has thus far exercised restraint, likely to complete repairs on its nuclear facilities and avoid being portrayed internationally as the side that reignited this conflict. But its patience is unlikely to last indefinitely, especially if that evidence does come to fruition. Each new explosion increases the pressure on Tehran to retaliate. If Israel continues these operations, it risks provoking the very escalation it sought to avoid anyway. There are also risks for Israel beyond the battlefield here too. Covert sabotage may rally Iranian domestic support behind the regime, strengthening rather than weakening Tehran's resolve. And in Iran, following those attacks by Israel, we saw a great deal more Iranian public unity than Israel bet on or the US considered either. And if Iran can gather and present convincing evidence of Israeli involvement on top of that, it could use this to justify a legally defensible military response under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Such a move would almost certainly trigger another cycle of open hostilities. So with Iran having shown much more restraint than Israel have, a more likely response, I think, would be for them to present their findings to the UN without necessarily backing it up with force or aggression again. An overt response to covert actions would no doubt be spun by pro-Israeli media as Iranian instigation, after all. We know how the media works, don't we? So while publicly celebrating the ceasefire, the US benefits from Israel's shadow war, which weakens Iran without risking direct American casualties. Yet if sabotage escalates into full-scale conflict again, the US will not only have asked for it by not reining Israel in, but could be dragged in more overtly themselves. So the June 24th ceasefire between Israel and Iran likely does more in diplomatic rhetoric than in reality. Mysterious explosions across Iran don't just happen all by themselves, after all. And coupled with Israeli leaders' open threats and Iran's combat readiness and rhetoric, it reveals that the war has simply shifted forms at this point in time. This is a conflict that appears to now being fought in the shadows, not so much paused at all. So the strategic logic of Israeli sabotage, the timing of the attacks, and their alignment with Mossad's historical methods all point towards Israel's responsibility here. If confirmed, these acts are not just provocations, they are clear-cut breaches of the truce's terms and a violation of international law. Iran, for its part, has made clear that it does not believe in the ceasefire. Pezeshkian's defiant statements, Khamenei's warnings, the RGC's readiness all signal a nation preparing for the next round. But nobody who observed the 12-day conflict last month believes Iran will be the ones that actually trigger it. Of course, one thing Israel will need lots of to carry on, and that they increasingly don't have much of, is money. Benjamin Netanyahu appears to be setting Israel's economy on fire to finance every one of these ongoing atrocities. Netanyahu chose genocide over growth, and the bill just arrived. He doesn't like it much at all. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hope to catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.